Okay, so I think this episode is going to be not so boring. I think it's going to be an interesting one. So, to introduce this podcast, I always have to note that Mr. K is somebody that I used to know back in my high school days. He was like a regular conservative leaning guy, as far as I knew. But in the era of Donald Trump, he became further right leaning, like an extremist with his Facebook posts. And recently, I even had to invite a few former neo Nazis on my podcast to assess whether one of his posts was actually Nazi like. And sure enough, they agreed that it was. It was an anti Semitic trope. And, you know, that was an interesting episode. This one's going to be interesting too, because here we're going to be talking about Trump's uh, ties to Jeffrey Epstein, among some other things. So it starts with a right wing meme that Mr. K posted, and I was curious if after Trump's second win he would sort of mellow out a little bit and maybe be a little bit less hypocritical and fanatical and all that. But no, it has not eased up. He's still on the same trajectory. So anyway, he posted a meme that shows a painting of a young girl sitting on steps with a puppy and a caption that reads, "Don't get distracted. Epstein's clients are still, molesting children." So, so yeah, that was a thing that he chose to post. And the hypocrisy there is interesting. So the meme plays on a theme seen in political messaging. It implies that attention is being deliberately diverted from an important issue, in this case, identifying and prosecuting Epstein's clients. Well, that's all fair and good. There's nothing wrong with that right off the bat. But while it's true that there has been widespread public interest in the list of powerful individuals connected to Jeffrey Epstein, this message can be misleading if it tries to minimize or obscure other critical issues, especially those tied to figures with controversial histories like, guess who? Their God King, Donald Trump. So his ties to Epstein are actually pretty well known, and in fact, he's never denied knowing him. And of course, knowing somebody is itself not a criminal act, right? I think most of us have known some people that we don't like. We've had them in our families. We've had them as professional associates because when you get a job, you sometimes have to rub shoulders with people you either don't get along with or who may even have some shady histories or behave unprofessionally at the workplace. Maybe in some instances, they're even doing crimes. That does happen. But what happens when you're, a powerful person who's potentially involved with somebody like that and assisting in crimes, nefarious activities, etc.? So, what about Trump and Jeffrey Epstein's relationship? Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein had a known social relationship during the 1980s and 1990s. Epstein was a financier and socialite whose connections included various celebrities and political figures. Again, in itself, not necessarily, implying anyone is inherently guilty. If you know somebody socially and they have committed crimes, it doesn't necessarily mean you are exactly complicit in those crimes. But Trump, when asked about Epstein in a 2002 interview with New York Magazine, said, "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. Keep that in mind. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." Hmm. Well, that sure doesn't sound very good. It sounds almost like in a sane world that would be something held against somebody who was running for office. But they don't call him Teflon Don for no reason. And this comment has been scrutinized due to Epstein's later conviction for sex crimes involving minors on that sex island. That was a major source of news. And then when Jeffrey Epstein was killed, people still sometimes refer to it as being Epsteined if somebody else is murdered, right? Under suspicious circumstances. And I might get into more of that later because there is a similar case that people just aren't talking about for some reason. And of course, there were lewd comments that Trump made about Ivanka Trump, his own daughter. Donald Trump made a number of statements about his daughter Ivanka that may have that many have found inappropriate. In 2006, he said on The View, "If Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her." Such comments, coupled with remarks about her physical appearance, have contributed to a perception of a lack of boundaries. So, yeah, keep that in mind too. I'll get back to that in a little bit more detail too. Sorry, I had to get a drink of water. But of course, there were also allegations of sexual misconduct against Trump. Trump has faced numerous allegations of sexual misconduct over the years. There are assault allegations. At least 26 women have publicly accused Trump of varying degrees of sexual misconduct, ranging from groping to sexual assault. In fact, this is what I was this is what I was getting at. The fact is, even Ivana Trump, who is Trump's ex-wife, had alleged that he raped her, but then he somehow compelled her to sign a non-disclosure agreement, also known as an NDA. And what do you know? In 2022, sometime after Trump had, announced that he was running for re-election, she ended up dead from blunt force trauma. And very oddly, he buried her in one of his golf courses. Now, to me, that sounds like it could be an episode of the Forensic Files, right? Doesn't it seem like that should maybe ring some alarm bells? Shouldn't that have been a little bit more of a campaign issue or something like that? I mean, that's a little bit weird. And at the time, the word Epstein was being bandied about on Twitter, and there's a reason for that. It sounds it sounds suspicious. Um, because keep in mind, this was somebody who had previously accused him of raping her, and she wound up dead, and now she's buried in his golf course. Why would he want her in his golf course? Now, one of the reasons that people sometimes bring up is that, oh, he's doing it for property tax reasons, to lower his taxes or something like that. And sure enough, that checks out. That sounds Trumpian. But at the same time, what do we know about some you know predators? They like to keep trophies of their crimes. So you never know. You never know. That's all I'm saying. I have to say this is alleged on my part, but it sounds like there could be something to it, man. It really does. So you know, there's the Access Hollywood tape. In 2005, Trump was recorded making a series of comments to Billy Bush, who is related to the Bush political dynasty, which is kind of gross. But anyway, Trump famously said, I just start kissing them. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them by the poontang. That's what he said. And years later, in the deposition on the E. Jean Carroll tape, they asked him about that Access Hollywood tape, and he said, stars have been doing this for a million years, and he added unfortunately or fortunately to that. So why would he say that? Why would he sort of make it into a joke? It's almost like he's you know, gloating or something. It's almost like he's admitting it. And that's part of the reason why the E. Jean Carroll case didn't go Trump's way. And also because when he was shown a picture of E. Jean Carroll, he actually misidentified her as his wife. So even in a case where there was relatively lacking evidence, he still botched it. He still incriminated himself, and yet he got away with it. To a large degree, to the point where he's now the president of the United States, or president elect at this point, but he'll get there, most likely. And the thing is, if this was if this was like 20 years ago, even one of these scandals would have ruined any normal political candidate running for office. Remember, well, a lot of you don't remember this, but there was a guy named Howard Dean who was running for presidents, a long time ago already. And his campaign was basically ended because he did an excitable shout, or whatever you want to call it. He sort of yelled out, and that was enough to basically sink his campaign. So think about that stark contrast, the sort of nightmare era that we're living in. Now, I wouldn't say that Howard Dean should have lost his campaign, but people were much more image conscious back then. A simple thing like that was enough to sink somebody's campaign, let alone these types of allegations. But then, of course, you also have the teen beauty pageants. Multiple contestants from Miss Teen USA and other pageants claimed that Trump would walk into dressing rooms unannounced while they were changing. Trump himself admitted during a 2005 interview with Howard Stern that he would enter the dressing room, citing his ownership of the pageant as a justification. And he he called them like beautiful women and stuff like that. And you know what that means. You know what that implies. I mean, it couldn't be any clearer. And with the E. Jean Carroll case, in 2019, journalist and author E. Jean Carroll accused Trump of raping her in the mid 1990s in a Bergdorf Goodman department store dressing room in Manhattan. Trump denied the allegations, of course, stating that Carroll was not his type. You know, that's that's a way of saying that I'm actually too good for that. Um, but yet, remember in that deposition, he wrongly identified her as his wife. So it seems like maybe she was his type, you know, in terms of his being able to be attracted to her. But anyway, in May 2023, a jury in a civil trial found Trump liable for sexually abusing and defaming Carroll, ordering him to pay $5 million in damages. And that was expanded because he kept on, you know, defaming her, kept on denying what had happened. So there's that. And while it's reasonable to question the lack of transparency regarding Epstein's high profile associates, memes like the one Mr. K posted can serve as deflection tools to shift focus from serious allegations against influential figures. Trump's history with Epstein, along with numerous allegations of misconduct and documented inappropriate behavior, remains relevant in public discussions about character and accountability. And now that Donald Trump has received full immunity or near full immunity from the US Supreme Court, he's going to feel empowered even more. So, really, the misinformation or oversimplification within memes can obscure a full understanding of significant issues. Addressing the complexities of such cases requires scrutinizing the behavior and histories of all involved parties without being swayed by one sided narratives designed to manipulate public focus. So, in my case, I believe Bill Clinton is most likely guilty of crimes related to Jeffrey Epstein. It certainly seems suspicious. I have no problem saying that, and not just because I'm technically not a registered Democrat, but because, you know what? If anybody has ties to Epstein and they committed crimes, by all means, I think that should be investigated. So Donald Trump not only knew and partied with Jeffrey Epstein, but had repeatedly publicly expressed lust over his own daughters and on national attention. That would be incestuous lust for his own daughter, and not just on the Howard Stern show, where he agreed it's okay to call his daughter Ivanka a piece of ass, among other things. On The View, like I said, Trump confessed that he would gladly date his own daughter if he wasn't related to her. And, you know, if it was just one instance, it would seem a little less suspicious. But there was also another interview with Robin Leach, of the lifestyles of the rich and famous, where Trump said of his other infant daughter at the time that she has Marla Maples' legs, then adding, "We don't know if she's got this part yet," while cupping his hands by his chest to signify breasts. "But time will tell," he said. Obviously, if Trump is going to express lust for one daughter, why would he stop at just one? And why not sexualize an infant too while he's at it, getting further astray? We're talking about only the best and brightest here, folks. That's what Trump promised. And I guess for some people, that's what he's delivered, you know? Also on the Wendy Williams show, Williams innocently asked Ivanka and Trump what they have in common, and Ivanka's answer was either real estate or golf, which, is a normal answer. But Trump's answer was sex. That's right. He said that he most has in common with his daughter sex. So tell me about family values. Tell me about those again. Also, let's not forget about Randy Kaufman. Once we're talking about Republican family values, who's that guy? Well, he's not particularly well known, but one thing he's known for is that he's a Republican who was busted whacking off near a preschool. Or how about Dennis Hastert, the longest serving Republican Speaker of the House, and only served a 13-month sentence? And gee, I wonder why that might be. After he was busted with, doing, uh, let's just say, activities with minors. The longest serving Republican Speaker of the House, nobody talks about him. The Democrats never bring him up. Nobody talks about him. And there are so many other examples I could go over. So, as I've wondered before, where is QAnon when it comes to such Republicans, or when it comes to all the church related molestation scandals and all that kind of stuff? How about Herschel Walker actually paying for multiple abortions? Or what about the conservative Duggar family who had an abortion? You know? Oh, wait, there were sex scandals in that family too? Of course there were. The seemingly appropriately named Jim Bob Duggar, a former Republican member of the Arkansas House of Representatives, turned reality TV star for the supposedly impressive feat of having so many kids. He had molested some girls when he was a teenager, including members of his own family. And sure, a person might say, but he was himself under 18 at the time. But the point is simply that he's not quite the pure, unadulterated, innocent little lamb that so many of these Christians pretend to be. You know, that's that's part of this too, is just the sheer hypocrisy of it all. Basically, if you put up a front of being perfect and holy and without sin, I don't trust you. In fact, the eldest son from the reality TV series Josh Duggar was also in trouble for molesting children, doing so when he was about 14 or 15 years old. I guess it's a case of like father like son. And he was busted by U.S. Marshals on charges of receiving and possessing child pornography. Only he was not a teenager at that time. And what is this? Josh Duggar was associated with the Family Research Council, an organization that lobbies against access to pornography, embryonic stem cell research, abortion, divorce, and LGBT rights, such as anti discrimination laws, same sex marriage, same sex civil unions, and LGBT adoption. Anyway, that's according to Wikipedia, but it's really just the standard Republican bullshit. So I believe that source. And maybe the Family Research Council should research its own members' families before pointing its dirty little paws at anybody else, you know? And we could go on and on here. Lauren Boebert's husband was arrested for apparently whipping out his wee wee in a bowling alley to show it to some girls, at least one of which was apparently underage. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, while talking so often about the need for a national divorce and wagging her phony moral finger at others, had her own divorce after having multiple flings with a tantric sex guru. And honestly, how desperate was that guy? I, I wouldn't be going there. I don't care how much of a loser somebody is if they don't get laid. There's a certain line you got to draw in the sand, and that's one place where I would absolutely draw a line. And the hypocrisy is an ever winding road. It really leads to nowhere, or at least nowhere good. Still, these Republicans will always prefer us to look over at someone else rather than themselves, perhaps because they psychologically have to, and perhaps because they also psychologically get off on being hypocrites. It seems like that would be a part of the thrill, if you ask me. And there is a quote perhaps wrongly attributed to Mark Twain. He says, or said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And the Republican Party is brimming with wannabe experts who don't really know even a fraction of what they claim expertise on. And it's been embarrassment after embarrassment. So, of course, they're still in power because, we've got to make America great. So, why do they have so much money and power if they're so dumb and hypocritical and strange overall? Well, because our system has a long standing habit of rewarding liars and charlatans. And to be fair, there are definitely Democrats who are liars and charlatans too. So, it's sort of a bipartisan effort when you really look at it. But individually, a person will drift to the right if they're the type of person who says, "I did my own research," but they never do any actual research. More than likely, he or she has never thought about an issue with other people from other viewpoints before and has never had to come to an agreement with these people to reach a conclusion on an issue. And maybe you think I'm being unfair on that point, you know? Well, just look at their sheer nonsensical paranoia regarding critical race theory or CRT, you know? So, what is CRT? Critical race theory is a cross disciplinary examination by social and civil rights scholars and activists of how laws, social and political movements, and media shape and are shaped by social conceptions of race and ethnicity. So practically no right-wing critic of CRT ever bothers to explain what it actually means with detailed analysis and counter-arguments. They just present a flimsy stereotype based on what they think it means. Similarly, they co-opted the term woke and rendered it virtually meaningless, in addition to drastically overusing it, both as an issue and as a word, right? So, might someone study the history of racism in the United States even as an adult and gain some insight into how the system has actually functioned? Of course. For example, one might want to study the hideous Dred Scott decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, which determined the following in 1857: a free Negro of the African race, whose ancestors were brought to this country and sold as slaves, is not a citizen within the meaning of the Constitution of the United States. When the Constitution was adopted, they were not regarded in any of the states as members of the community which constituted the state and were not numbered among its people or citizen. Consequently, this is the decision continuing. Consequently, the special rights and immunities guaranteed to citizens do not apply to them, and not being citizens within the meaning of the Constitution, they are not entitled to sue in that character in a court of the United States, and the circuit court has no jurisdiction in such a suit. So, that was the supposed highest form of justice in the United States issuing that decision, right? So, should people learn about that in schools? Absolutely. They should also learn about Loving versus Virginia, another case which finally made it so states could not ban interracial marriage. Why might Republicans especially object to that case being studied? Well, because that was decided in 1967, not 1857. That's obviously more recent history, and the fact that interracial marriage was capable of being banned before 1967 makes the US government and these states look pretty terrible. So look at it this way. I'm only a little over 40, and this case happened only about 14 years before I was born. It's not exactly ancient history, folks, but Republicans don't want us knowing this stuff or thinking about it. In fact, I dare say that Marjorie Taylor Greene's national divorce talk has a lot to do with wanting to turn the clock back. Hell, she also admitted she wants to ban any Democrats who moved to Georgia from voting for 5 years, which is, in her view, about states' rights and, as well as the right to ban gay and transgender people from the state, and surely other hideous things that violate basic human rights. In fact, Texas Republicans now want us to use their state's rights to ban polling locations in schools. So, that's sort of a dead giveaway of their intent. And people are, they're foolishly believing in this stuff. So, if Republicans have their way, the youth will be dumb as rocks. Individually, he or she will only be shown one side and left to evaluate the side based on intentionally restricted information. They will essentially be sequestered from outside facts, similar to what can happen during a jury's deliberations if they're separated from media access to prevent bias from affecting the outcome. Only in this case, the only facts they'll be able to consider are the heaps upon heaps of Republican lies and bizarre conspiracy theories. And it won't be bias that they're being protected from, but the actual facts. They'll get a bunch of disjointed stereotypes about the world. You know, uh, Again, the outside bias would simply be anything that's factual that contradicts these extreme narratives. So it's a common expression that a good idea is a good idea no matter who has it. But when conservatives say in so many words, the liberal is obsessed with pushing their ideas and beliefs, I have to wonder if they've been paying attention to how President Trump has operated. He and the Republicans have been doing that very same thing, only on steroids. Then again, these people are by no means believers in small, limited government, especially not anymore. And it seems wrong to assume Republicans ever once were, as they've stood for big government for the rich and well connected, and for the military and prison industrial complex, which have merged, and they will further emerge with their hideous and almost cartoonishly unconstitutional ideals of Christian nationalism, which, you know, are just simply terrible. Yes, most of these people cling to what has been called Republican Jesus, which ironically tends to look vastly different from the Jesus in the Christian Bible. So, for example, did you know that Jesus was not an immigrant basher? Here's a quote from Leviticus 19:34. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. You know? Then there's Deuteronomy 27:19. Cursed is anyone who withholds justice from the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow. Then all the people shall say Amen. And here's another one from Chronicles 16:19 through 22. When they were few in number, of little account, and strangers in the land, wandering from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another people, he allowed no one to oppress them. He rebuked kings on their account, saying, Do not touch my anointed ones, do my prophets no harm. And then there's Job 29:15 through 17. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy, and I championed the cause of the stranger. I broke the fangs of the unrighteous and made them drop their prey from their teeth. So, holy crap, these are some radical teachings almost. And then Psalms 146:9 says, "The Lord watches over the strangers, he upholds the orphans and the widow, but the way of the wicked he brings to ruin." So he watches over the strangers. That suggests that he gives special protections and actually special care to them. You know, if anything, the God of the Bible would elevate the so called illegals. The Bible also urged people to abandon their personal possessions and give them to the needy, almost like taxes or something, like the wicked welfare state. It also says in Matthew, "Then Jesus said to his disciples, 'Truly I tell you, it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God.'" So, some pretty extreme literature here. It's almost like it could have come from Karl Marx or something. In fact, it's almost more extreme than Karl Marx in some ways. Like this is some hardcore far left shit right here. So the Bible apparently does the exact opposite of Republicans. It regularly praises immigrants and bashes the rich. Also, if we're talking about Bible passages, what would the Bible say about teaching our children anything that might contain sexually explicit content? Oh, wait, the Bible itself has sexually explicit content that, by conservatives' own standards, should logically be banned from a child's access. So, one of the most compelling examples, quote, "There she lusted after her lovers, whose genitals were like those of donkeys, and whose emission was like that of horses." One needn't modernize it to properly understand it, but to be absolutely clear, that passage means she remembered her lover with a penis like a donkey and a flood of semen like a horse. That's Ezekiel 23:20. So that's porn talk, baby. That's explicit. It's something you could read in a Hustler magazine, or whatever. Pick your poison. Uh, but you obviously can't allow that in the school library. It's literally talking about a guy's giant cock and how much jizz comes out of it. That's not even me being gross or even humorous. It's right there in the Bible. That's literally what it's talking about. So, yeah, when we're talking about, how moral all this stuff is, just keep this in mind. Just keep it in mind.